in the valley, it's all about like scale. It's all about how can we scale this up and get as much people on some platform. But I think what's really fascinating is that it's difficult to really find community in really large groups.
Okay.
And smaller communities is where you can really build really tight-knit and powerful networks that where you could get where there's a lot of mutual benefit for everyone involved.
Hey Mandela, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Fantastic. So we're just talking about, usually we like to start the show with, how we can get people from the Caribbean diaspora that are at home and that are all over the world to start pursuing more things in machine learning. For folks on the call, Mandela is sort of the nexus of this entire effort. He founded the first sort of, I would say, almost like national class in machine learning in Trinidad. So tell us a bit more about what led you to do that.
So sort of last summer, I organized this artificial intelligence course in collaboration with BPTT. And sort of the motivation behind it was that I've been blessed with a lot of opportunities myself, either through mentorship, through just a lot of mentorship, my parents. I've just been blessed with a lot of opportunities and to sort of grow my talents, to develop my skill set. And I thought this was a really good opportunity for me to sort of give back in a really special way. I've always been excited about the role and the power of education in being able to transform people's lives. And particularly the pandemic showed that virtual education, remote education was something that was pretty much here to stay. So the opportunity spurred on by the pandemic sort of pushed me to really sort of develop this initiative. And thankfully, I think it was a big success. A lot of people really excited and sort of learned a lot.
Fantastic. And I don't think it's the last we've seen of it, right? So there's hopefully more to come after you get through all the school. So why don't you give us a little flavor of what you're working on these days and sort of where you're originally from?
So originally from South Trinidad and Tobago, particularly Palmis, if you know that area.
Represent, okay.
Block 5 in particular. So sort of grew up in South, went to NAPS, Naprima College for high school, San Fernando Boys Government for primary school, if you're going back that far. And sort of high school was my first introduction to sort of like computer science, to sort of particularly IT, because we didn't have computer science as a formal subject at school, but through IT and just sort of broader education was able to get familiar with a lot of these like computer science concepts. And essentially I'm now doing a PhD in computer vision, focused on how do we train AI systems to understand the visual world, particularly the visual world as it relates to video data. And yeah, that's sort of the what I've been up to.
Okay, so PhD, you're one of the the crazy ones who decided to pursue a PhD. And before we sort of hop into that journey, why don't you tell us what's your interpretation of AI versus machine learning versus data science? Because different people will hear different things, and I'm sure you've seen different things at your level.
So sort of, I know it creates a lot of confusion for a lot of people. And I think how I think of it is that artificial intelligence is this language that describes this broad area of computer science, which focuses on how can we teach computers to basically simulate human behavior and human intelligence. So if you could sort of typically break down what a human can do, a human can see, so basically they can sort of represent and understand the visual world. They can communicate through language. They can reason. They can make decisions.
Mm-hmm.
given complex data and complex scenarios, they can essentially, they're very tactile human beings. They're very tactile so that they could touch, they could feel. They also sort of experience emotions. They also know how to navigate in some physical space. And these broad areas of human behavior and human prowess is what AI is trying to sort of simulate using computers. So for example, my area of research of computer vision is how can we get computers to see and understand the visual world like humans do. The branch of natural language processing is focused on how can we get humans to understand and manipulate language and human symbols. Robotics is how do we sort of create these embodied agents like humans can navigate the visual world. And there's branches such as emotional AI, which allows AI to understand sort of emotions and feelings, etc. So AI is this very language to describe this overarching theme of all of these different areas. And this can be achieved in pretty much, let's say, on a high level, two ways. One is that we could try to like hard code to and sort of explicitly explain to the computer what a cat is or what being happy means. So essentially, you have to figure out how to represent the data to the computer, right? So that they take this representation of these different concepts, and based on these representations, they can predict some sort of understanding of some concept. And essentially, you could hand define these representations. So essentially, if you like say like an artist, you can maybe like this, and you could describe it properly. You could probably describe to a computer what a cat looks like.
Right.
But as you can imagine, this stuff becomes extremely complicated because cats are very different. Cats look very different ways, different colors, different shapes, etc. So it becomes very difficult to really represent
the full spectrum of the entire thing that you're looking at.
By hand coding or hand defining these features or representations of the different concepts. So what machine learning is essentially, can we, instead of humans having to define these representations or these features to the computer, can we just give a lot of data to the computer, onto these AI systems, and then they can learn these representations of these different inputs themselves.
Yes.
So machine learning is essentially the computer has to learn how to represent rather than us having to hand define and hand code how these different representations of these different concepts. So that's sort of the distinction between. So basically, ML is basically a way to solve artificial intelligence.
Right. Just one of the components.
Right. And data science is essentially, how I think of it, is mostly using AI and machine learning, particularly to solve either business problems or some sort of data analytics, essentially trying to come to some sort of understanding based on some hypothesis question.
Yeah.
So data science is usually a little more application focused and has usually some clear objectives in mind, usually either from a business standpoint, government standpoint, etc.
Okay, nice. And I think for everyone listening, it's very important to understand in your own mind when you speak to someone what their version of AI, ML, and data science is, so at least you're on the sort of same plane when you're talking. Next, what motivated you to get into machine learning, AI? Yeah, I'm sure you started off in data science at some point based on your definitions. If you can give us a little journey from high school to now. I know you kind of layered that a little bit, but walk us through.
So yeah, so sort of my journey actually, particularly into AI, ML, data science, however you spin it. I didn't really know much about it or what it was maybe until like my third year in college or undergrad. Okay. And what had happened was that I was doing my undergrad in computer science at Harvard University in the States, and they offered this class in machine learning my junior year or my third year of studies. And a lot of my friends were taking it, and I was like, yeah, I would jump along for the ride. And for me, what was really exciting about it was that it combined a lot of my background in maths with my programming skills to make a computer do some really interesting and exciting things. And it was sort of this perfect balance of math and programming that I really enjoyed.
Yes.
And it seemed to have a very clear practical impact to solve really problems at scale, which was sort of like my other motivating factor. So essentially, I pushed to do an internship my junior summer in machine learning and AI. And I was fortunate enough to get the opportunity to intern at Instagram that summer and to work on their machine learning algorithms to essentially personalize content for users for their Instagram feed, etc. And that exposure at that point was really exciting because I was building these algorithms at a scale that touches on millions and billions of people. And what got me excited and what sort of pushed me to pursue a PhD is that these algorithms are sort of, in a sense, general purpose. And even though here, this problem was essentially trying to make content more engaging and more personalized for the regular user as they sort of interact with these apps, this could be used to sort of personalize the content for education. It could be used to sort of personalize therapy for mental health, for a lot of these other really big and difficult problems. So for me, it was sort of this opening to this broader application of AI just to solve some really difficult and important problems that a lot of people face. Today.
So you did your internship at Instagram, and for the listeners, what languages were you coding in? Is it all Python? Were you doing Scala stuff?
A lot of Python and then some C++.
And C++. Okay. And that's just to optimize to run at real time and things like that?
Yeah, so you sort of need C++ for just efficiency and sort of just for this to work really well at scale. But I think Python is essentially for most projects does pretty much the job.
Cool. And so after Harvard, you finished, you had your internship at Instagram. Where'd you go next?
Yeah, so so that was sort of like my decision point was whether to sort of decide to pursue a career as a sort of machine learning engineer at Instagram/Facebook full time, or sort of pursue studies and get deeper in sort of AI machine learning. And I was fortunate enough to have a really important mentor in my life, Maxine Williams, sort of applied to the Rhodes Scholarship.
Cool.
And she was also a Rhodes Scholar, which allowed me to sort of pursue essentially graduate studies at the University of Oxford, basically for free, and to pursue whatever degree I wanted.
Kudos to you, man.
And yeah, I was fortunate enough to win the Caribbean Rhodes Scholarship in 20. And then that allowed me to sort of pursue a PhD in AI at the University of Oxford, which I've been doing for the last couple of years.
You were 3 years now, 4 years?
Couple of years. It's only been a little over 2 years.
Ooh. And you were telling me you're gonna finish maybe this year, so 3 years PhD. So for everyone on the call, it took me 5. Mandela's gonna hit it in 3 or 3 and some change. So that's a testament to sort of hard work there as well, right?
Yeah, no, yeah. So hopefully it's able to be wrapped up in 3. The timeline is usually a little shorter in the UK, because they sort of usually expect people to enter with a master's degree. But they make some exceptions. So I was able to apply without the master's degree and get it done.
And that's usually like a trick that you see in the US too, like having gone through master's and PhD myself. Like if I'm looking back, I would go straight from bachelor's into PhD. And then if you decide, hey, I don't want to do this thing anymore, you can always pull out with a master's. So that's a strategy for everyone at home.
Yes, in the US, what usually happens is that you do a bachelor's degree for 4 years, and then you apply directly to PhD programs, which usually has a combined master's and PhD component. The master's component usually takes 2 years, and then you do another usually 4 years on top of that for the PhD. But if after your 2-year master's you realize that you don't want to pursue further research, you can just leave it a master's degree and not have to do the full PhD. But yeah, in the UK, it's usually a lot more sort of direct, such streamlined. So you apply directly to PhD programs, and you usually expect a master's degree before. Even though they make some exceptions, which they did in my case.
Yes. And what would you say you've had sort of the top quality education in the US, you've had the top quality of education in the UK. What's the difference in mindset, you would say, in the people there that are learning? Do you think it's the same? What are the advantages, disadvantages?
So I think that the US are usually focused on a more broad-based education and sort of holistic development of you as a scholar.
Okay.
But I think in the UK, it's a lot more sort of directed and focused and streamlined and specialized on one particular area. So it's I think there's benefits and sort of cons of both, and probably a balance is probably the optimal.
Yeah.
But I would say if I was to do it all over again, I'd probably do the same thing where I would do undergrad in the States, where I think having that broad-based education earlier, I think, is really important, and then specializing later, building upon that sort of foundation, I think gives you the best balance, I would say.
Makes sense. And one of the things we try to highlight in the show is, call it an advantage, or what things happened in your career that were unique to you being a person of the Caribbean diaspora, right? So in this case, you had a mentor, Maxine Williams. You want to tell us a bit about her and sort of her impact in your life? And she's from Trinidad as well, right? Correct?
Yep. So that's a really, really good question. I think how I would describe it is more in terms of the fact that you end up realizing, particularly, that as a Trinidad, even more broadly as a Caribbean, as someone from the Caribbean, once you step outside, so it's interesting. Like, so I grew up playing squash for Trinidad,
right?
And we would have these Caribbean squash championships every year, and the goal was for Trinidad to win the Caribbean team title. And you're competing against the Guyanese, the Bajans, the Jamaicans, and it would be this like big, like, let's say, squash fight where you're trying to basically compete and compete against these other Caribbean islands. And then let's say CSEC Cape, like you're trying to top the Caribbean in whatever subject that you're pursuing. I was sort of top of the Caribbean in sort of maths and IT when I did Cape a few years ago. And then when you step outside of that bubble and you enter sort of the US and the UK, you realize that, like, we're such a very small, minuscule size of population relative to pretty much like, if you think about Trinidad, 1 million versus 320 million in the US, that's 320 times as bigger. You start to sort of appreciate the importance of finding community within these sort of bigger spaces.
Yes.
And I think the small islandness in us tries to find this community with other sort of Caribbean people. And that was sort of like how this group was actually was born, was that we're all sort of doing our stuff in the US, UK, Europe, whatever. But being able to connect with others from the Caribbean who's doing similar stuff was sort of like what brought us together. And I think it's a glue that I'm really fascinated with a lot about how small but
Agile, so to say, right?
small but like small but powerful communities, like in terms of how smallness could bring power, in the sense that like there's all like in the valley, it's all about like scale. It's all about how can we scale this up and get as much people on some platform. But I think what's really fascinating is that it's difficult to really find community in really large groups.
Okay.
And smaller communities is where you can really build really tight knit and powerful networks that where you could get where there's a lot of mutual benefit for everyone involved.
I see.
And that's what I found really interesting about, say, pursuing my computer science education at Harvard, for example, where I had the option to go to, for example, MIT, which is right down the road.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a much bigger computer science program, probably maybe 5 to 10 times bigger in terms of the number of people who pursue
No
computer
way.
science at MIT. But for me, I found that like what I enjoyed about my Harvard degree was that even though it was a very small computer science population, we all sort of knew each other. And
Mm-hmm.
even though now I'm in the UK, I still have close computer science friends who came here to study. If I go back to the US, it's a very similar sort of vibe. And so I think probably this is similarly also find that with squash as well, where like squash is a very small community, but because it's quite small, like when I was in Barbados recently, like I was able to play with a lot of the Barbados squash players because I grew up playing squash with this very small community.
Mm-hmm.
So it's I think for me it's interesting that like how there's this. I think my contrarian view on things is that I think small communities are actually more powerful than bigger ones.
Bigger ones. Oh.
And that that's what, for me, being Caribbean in sort of the US and the UK sort of allowed me to take advantage of, where, for example, Maxine saw my story on The Guardian about how I was pursuing a computer science degree at Harvard.
Mm-hmm.
And because of this idea, like, oh, we're all small trainees in this
Big space.
this big space. Let me try to help and sort
Wow.
of reach out. So she reached out to me and was sort of like my first sort of exposure to Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
And sort of has been like a mentor ever since. And I think what basically connected us was that like two trainees, very similar sort of story in this very alien place, and trying to sort of make a difference.
Wow. And yeah, that's a beautiful story, because I think most of us who end up in machine learning typically don't land there on our own, at least up to now. And there's so many other things out there now where people are more formally pursuing it. But I really like the fact that you focus on the small community aspect. So one of the things I wanted to ask about that's, I think, fairly unique when you see people pursuing lots of education is you've kept this high degree of sports on the side, right? So you're a very active person. In addition, you're highly accomplished academically. How have you managed both of them going along, and why have you kept up with it on the squash side, even though I know PhD is tough?
Yeah, so it's an interesting question, because I think I've struggled with this with this part of my identity, even at Harvard, where I nearly quit at least a couple of times while playing on the
Wow.
varsity. And yeah, similar sort of stories here at Oxford. I think what has kept me going is that probably the fact that, yeah, probably the same answer, that community I think is very important.
Okay.
So like I've I think probably the times where I didn't want to continue was probably the times when I didn't feel that I was enjoying some aspects of the community. I think what has probably kept me going is sort of looking at the broader picture. Like there are a lot of people in the community that I really enjoy, sort of still sort of playing with, being friends with, etc. So like my brother also plays,
Okay.
and that was probably one of the biggest incentives for me to continue playing in college, because he was on our rival squash
Oh, nice.
Trinity College, and being able to compete with him was probably one of the stuff that kept me going throughout college. And we played 2 national finals together actually.
Okay.
While we were both in the States. So I think, yeah, my dad introduced both of us pretty young, and then he always tries to keep me involved as well. So I think the community and family aspect of it has definitely kept me sort of going.
Kept you going there. Okay. And what would you say are the benefits of playing a sport while pursuing education, right? Those are incredibly difficult things. I was on the rowing team in my undergrad, and for me, I think it kept me out of trouble, so to say, and just kept me 5 o'clock in the morning at training, and you're just too tired to do anything stupid. So what were your thoughts around that? How did that mentally sort of give you an edge over other people?
So I think maybe a couple of things. One is that sport is usually not in isolation, so you have to be part of a team. Like even in an individual sport as squash, as in the team aspect was that we all 9 players, and each of our matches count towards the team's points.
Yes.
And your match, you have to win your match to help the team win, essentially. So even if the incentive was that even if you want your teammates to win, because even if you win, your match in isolation doesn't help the whole team.
Right.
And I think being part of a team and playing for a team as special experiences that you mightn't really get as much exposure unless you really seek it out in just pure academic settings. And being able to be and play as part of a team is such an important skill to be successful in sort of the professional world as well. And I think you see it a lot with athletes where they're very good in team settings. Another aspect is that athletes have also really, they know to get stuff done. Fundamental, like you had to weight practice in the morning. You had to weight practice in the morning, but then you have training in the evening. You have to show up. Like being able to show up, no matter how tired, no matter how exhausted, no matter if you have an exam the next day, you have stuff to do. Like showing up, and even in these very difficult circumstances, I think is what I think differentiates athletes. And I think it's something you just don't really get exposure to unless you sort of play a sport. Yeah, I think those 2 things, teamwork can be, and it's showing up. Showing up no matter what the circumstances.
Very important. Yeah, and I wanted to sort of highlight that as well. I think when you think of, let's say, the pain of studying is all in your head. It's all mental, right? Versus you playing a sport and you're physically drained. You just want to quit. So I think you get a lot more practice in the realm of I want to quit and just not do this anymore. So when you go into the academic realm, like I want to quit, and okay, I can't quit because my coach told me, hey, you need to keep going, and you take those lessons with you into your academic pursuits. I think for me, that was fundamental for me finishing my degree. If I wasn't working out or playing some type of sport, I think the stress of those environments would have taken over. And just the grit that you get from playing sport. So at least, hopefully everyone listening would pursue a sport in tandem with their education and work in general, just to, de-stress, but also learn the lessons somewhere else other than reading a book.
Exactly. No, it's the intangibles that count.
So you talked about network, and you talked about small networks in particular, and how that has had an impact in your career. What would you say? Not all of us went to Harvard. I didn't go to Harvard. I went to a smaller school. And what's always interested me is what are some important lessons you would have taken away from Harvard, and like how did you change before you came to Harvard, and like what did you turn into after Harvard, mentally, I would say?
Mentally, that's an interesting question. I think I think probably the main takeaway from my experience there, and it's something that I think I keep thinking about, is that there's no universal definition of success, and success is a metric that could only be defined by yourself and past versions of yourself. And
past versions like that.
And a lot of people, and I struggled with it a lot, particularly when I was there, is that I was like, I came from the Caribbean where I was top student, to a place where I just wasn't. and I found myself defining, because I think in the sort of big fish, small pond mentality, you sort of define yourself in terms of others. It's like, I want to be the biggest fish in the small pond.
Right.
And you define your success relative to how high you came in end of term exams, or how high you came on the Cape merit list. And then I sort of wanted to do the same thing when I came to Harvard, and yes, I just couldn't. The list was a very different
game, right?
Yeah, this was a very different game, but I think I don't think I fully got over that fact when I was there. I think it's something I still struggle with, is that particularly is that everyone's circumstances are different, and everyone has their own journey and in their own time, and the only journey you can compare yourself to is yours. And so, for example, in terms of, even though I did IT in high school, like a lot of like my freshman year roommate, to give you some perspective, grew up in Ohio, and
okay.
I did some coding in high school, but it wasn't anything that significant. Like, as I said, there wasn't really a computer science degree, so I did IT. I did IT at the Cape level, and so I probably had maybe, let's say, if I was to get maybe 100 hours of
coding experience
when I had entered Harvard. My freshman year roommate had about 5,000 hours of coding. And like, to put some perspective on what 5,000 hours of coding experience is like, according to his words, it's like a senior engineer at Google with like 5,000 years of experience.
Whoa.
What I would equate to. And like, me comparing myself to him is just not fair. But you're in a place where everyone's trying to be on top, everyone's trying to be the best, and you sort of drift into this mentality of, I want to compare myself to others, and that really severely affects your mental health. And one is just the comparison. Like, you can't compare apples to oranges. Like, they're very fundamentally different. Like, they have different textures, they have different shapes, they have different benefits. And you can only compare apple to an apple, and the only person you can compare yourself to is yourself. And I think that's probably something I'm still learning and growing with. Particularly after growing up in the Caribbean, that was not how I thought. So that's probably my biggest takeaway. And then two is that I don't think this was particularly defined in my Harvard experience, but it has sort of defined my journey so far. Is that a lot of people get this impression that success is a lone journey, and it's not. And fundamentally, it takes a village, it takes a community. And no matter what anyone, like, when you see these self-made billionaire lists and it's all BS, and it's all just not true. Like no one is self-made. Like they were either had help from their teachers, from their parents, either financially or either financially or not. They either had co-founders, they either had
employees.
They had employees working for them. Like no one, and nothing is self-made. I think these stuff are quite evangelized and are quite but it's just not true. So from my experience, like, the only reason I got through my computer science degree was that I was able to work with some really smart people to do problem sets with, to do projects, homework assignments. That's how I learned. I think the benefit of me going to Harvard, I got to learn from some of the
best of the best
classmates, not necessarily professors, or not necessarily TA instructors, but just like I learned so much from just the people that I was able to surround myself with and do projects and home and problem sets with. So I think the biggest advice is just like find people to sort of join your journey and sort of to work together on.
Perfect. So one of the things I've admired about you is you're a man that enjoys life, right? I met you back to the Next Gen boot camp in Trinidad. I didn't know much about you before that, but when I saw your big profile, Harvard, Rhodes Scholar, PhD, but I think one of the things, if no one knows on the call, you are in my mind one of the biggest SOCA evangelists that I know.
Yeah.
So I see you all over the world whining, and like you have brought whining to the world stage, I would say, right? From an academic perspective there. So tell us about your joys of that.
Yeah, so I think that's a good point. I think everyone, it's probably something I'm really passionate about is that everyone needs to listen to soca. And like I think about it like every day. I'm just like, how do people live their entire life without getting exposed to soca music? Like, and it's literally I listen to soca maybe definitely every day. I don't know what percentage of my day I listen to soca, but a high percentage of my day is soca music is on the background. And I think I think what soca does and why I love it so much is that, and also just like Trinidadian culture and people in general, is that at the end of the day it's not that serious.
Yes.
And I think a lot of people forget. I think a lot of people forget that sort of perspective, especially once you sort of go through these sort of institutions, etc. Is that you sort of put all of this sort of
put yourself on a pedestal and all this kind of thing.
Yeah. By the end of the day, we all just human beings. We all just trying to have a good time, and I think soca just epitomizes that sort of emotion and that sort of ethos that no other music that really comes close to.
Close to it, okay.
Yeah.
And for the folks on the call, the reason why I pull that question out is I think Mandela's fairly unique when it comes to someone who's achieved a lot, right? He's done things on a physical level with his squash career. He's done things on an academic level with, just pushing his mental pursuits. But in addition, like he still enjoys life. So for all the young students out there that, hey, you could still enjoy life and beat book like a crazy person. And I just wanted to highlight that as an example, right? That
Another thing actually is that I also grew up singing calypso and soca.
Interesting. Okay.
In national competitions, actually. So my dad is a calypso genre himself. So he got my brother and I singing calypso and soca. We were both national finalists at certain points. So I also grew up in the culture, in not only as like a listener,
but as an expressor.
And I think one of the interesting things about music is that when you think about the most influential sort of platforms, there's only 3 or 4 things I sort of put up on that sort of pedestal. One is sport. Like when you think of like if the most followed person on Instagram is Cristiano Ronaldo, for example. Like his level of influence is just based on his Instagram followers over 200 million people. That's like close to the United States.
Right.
Then the next thing is music. When you think of people like Bob Marley, you think of people like Michael Jackson, you think of people like Drake, you think of like the influence these people have, the platforms they have to make a difference. It's in the hundreds of millions.
Yes.
So it's
more so than sport. Yeah, that's interesting.
Sports, music, and then and then the next thing I would say is probably and then technology. So Facebook, 2-point-something billion people, close to 3 billion, sort of their family of apps. So for me, I've always been interested in how can I use and build a platform to make a difference, and sports, music, and technology are sort of
all 3. Okay, so I think you're hinting at something will come out Out of the Mandela accelerator. Cool. So you're at the forefront of computer vision, right? You're in Oxford doing a PhD, right? You're publishing in the top conferences. What's one thing you would say to the three people, a high schooler, a college student, and a professional that want to pursue computer vision? One of the things that I had a good opportunity to meet Ian Goodfellow, right? At sort of deep learning, and he was just like, listen, go read papers. Don't read books, read papers, because they are at the forefront and you're not behind. What would you say? Yeah, what's your piece of advice for folks that want to pursue computer vision?
So I think, yes, I think reading papers is obviously good advice. I think for me, and I think what drew me a lot to computer vision, and I think what would draw a lot of people and get people excited, is that at the end of the day, computer vision is very practical.
Yes.
It's a very practical, and natural language processing are both very practical branches of AI. So if there's a lot of problems that you have that are fundamentally computer vision problems. So something that maybe comes to mind is that say that you're a high school student. One problem that you may have is that you find it easier. It's definitely much easier. Unless you have like an iPad, for example. If you might find it easier to do your math problems on a notepad, for example, or like a sheet of paper.
Right.
One application of computer vision is basically OCR. So that's optical character recognition. Essentially, can you take a picture of your notes and can you basically digitize it?
Yes.
And that is a very practical problem that if you get your hands dirty and build that application, that is how you get, one, you're solving a problem that you want to solve personally. This is something that like your own personal pain point, but you're also developing a skill set and developing and learning the tools and the different on how to solve this problem. And I think my advice would be to seek out those problems in your life that you find like annoying, you find frustrating. Okay. And quite a bit of those problems are probably computer vision problems. And there's a lot of different tools and different GitHub repos that you could then use to sort of build up a solution to sort of solve those problems. So I think computer vision is very practical. And so think of those practical problems that you have, and using computer vision can be an easy way to sort of, and an enriching way to sort of solve those problems.
Yep. And for folks, let's say in college, would you advise going into a PhD? I think the one caveat there for me is, I think when I spoke with you early on, is like advisor. They really, in my opinion, make or break your PhD to a degree, right?
Yeah. So I've been thinking a lot about sort of, the interesting thing is that with anything in life, you have to question why, or like what's more sort of pursuing this path. A PhD for me sort of in a way fell in my lap / I didn't really have as much, let's say, intention behind it, being totally honest. It worked out well in sort of hindsight, and I'm blessed for that. But I think the question of why a PhD is going to become increasingly important, because I don't know how necessary it's going to be in the future, particularly for AI machine learning. Like everything is pretty much open source. Everything is pretty much open source. Communication tooling is because of the internet, because of social media, is at a place where if you have a question or you want to collaborate with someone, you can just shoot them an email, you could send them a Facebook message. And so I think because of communication, the sort of democratizing of AI machine learning tooling. So for example, like one of my friends started this company, PyTorch Lightning, that has democratized PyTorch to the regular user. You have tools such as Fast AI. You have tools such as
there's so many libraries now, right?
There's so many abstracted libraries now that makes AI ML training and models, etc., so much more democratized. And then the fact that you also just have a lot of this open, so like the feed is fundamentally open source. All the papers are published on archive, all the code is published on GitHub. And yeah, a combination of those factors means that from a practical sense, like getting your hands dirty doesn't require a PhD. And then if your objective is academia, then a PhD is sort of a requirement. But outside of academia, I think the sort of cushy research positions at these companies now is more fundamental research. Now I think it's going to probably shift to more applied research, where I don't think a PhD is that necessary. And I think the whole sort of fundamental research cushy jobs at these companies are going to become less and less anyway. So I personally, I'm not sure what the sort of future of PhD in AI/ML is going to look like. I think it's going to become less and less important, is my hypothesis, actually.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one, right? Having gone through one myself, and same thing in your respect, it's not something you wanted to do. I'm not a big fan of school, actually, especially formal education. So I just did it because that was my path to sort of staying in the States. However, looking back now, I think you do end up spending a lot of time on things that may not actually lead to applications. So a lot of your papers might just contribute to the body of knowledge, but some of those algorithms may not turn into an actual product. So I think you have to feel out for yourself, where do you want to be and what sort of impact you want to have. Is it an academic impact? Is it a production level impact with forming a company, a new library? So I'm happy that you've expressed some honest thoughts on the PhD. So note to everyone out there, it may or may not be necessary. Get your hands dirty. I think that's the takeaway. And so as we get a little closer, what are 2 career tips that you have for a high schooler, college person, and professional?
So I think I'd use the same point, one of the same points for all 3. And I think it's decided that, like I've sort of hinted and sort of expressed previously, that teamwork makes a dream work. And yes, like success is not a lone journey. Like, for example, to give you another example, I think one that really resonates with me is that I did a study group with a few of my friends, maybe like 4 or 5 or 6 in high school. And we'd all come at my place and do past papers, do studying maybe 3 or 4 times a week. And we all were doing sort of math applied maths, physics, let's say. And to put into context, it was maybe, let's take applied math, for example. It was 4 of us studying applied math at my house, and 3 of us came top 10 in the Caribbean.
Wow.
And 1 of us in both years topped the Caribbean both times. Year 1 and year 2. And none of it would have been possible without each other and pushing each other, etc. And same thing happened in college. Same thing is happening in my PhD. Like, my PhD really started to become really successful once I started working with one of my collaborators, Yuki, and I've collaborated with him on pretty much all my projects since then. And that's sort of when my PhD started going really well. So I think, yes, teamwork, work with really smart people like, no matter how old you are, that's usually the answer. And then maybe something more tailored, I think, for high schoolers. A lot of people, I also don't, I'm not until next with myself, but I think there's this idea about how time compounds.
Okay.
And compounding is this beautiful thing. And what it fundamentally means is that your growth, your rate of change of growth like sort of goes exponential or changes more quickly over time.
Yes.
And that's why, for me, I think it's really important to really invest early. Like anything, like invest financially in your education and your professional development. The earlier you invest is the greater your rewards over time because of the compounding effect of time. And and so for high schoolers, like, start early. Like, if you like as much like start early is definitely like my biggest advice, because I said like while I entered Harvard with 100 years of coding experience, my roommate was at 5,000, and by the time we graduated, he was employee number 20 at a company that exited for $1 billion, and I was still I was still chilling around in my dorm room. So yes, compounding is a beautiful thing. So start early, work hard. For college, relationships is what matters. Like the stuff that you learn, both the tangible and intangible stuff, are going to come from your classmates, not from your professor. So spend time investing in those relationships. They will make a difference both in the present and in the future time. And that also, relationships is something that also compounds. So invest in relationships. And then from a professional standpoint, I would say try, if you're comfortable, you're in the wrong place. And a lot of people want to be comfortable. That should definitely not be your optimization function. Like if you're comfortable, you're either not learning enough, you're not pushing yourself enough. So try to push yourselves in companies and places and projects that make you feel uncomfortable.
Wow, appreciate that. And the last two, what are 3 principles you live by, and the 3 books that you recommend folks read?
Yep. So I think my number one principle, I think it's the effect or the natural follow-up to what I've been saying, is that, as I said, teamwork makes the dream work. So my main principle would be to show gratitude and give thanks to those around you, sort of help you to the position that you are, whether it's your parents, your classmates, that teacher that wrote that recommendation letter for you, that mentor who pointed you to a job, and who sort of gave you that first opportunity to like give thanks in either small or big. It doesn't have to be anything big, like a simple like thank you card on their birthday, Christmas, like a message saying that you're thinking of them and that you appreciate their sort of time and
impact on your life, right?
Yes, it's simple but goes a really long way. So show gratitude and give thanks, according to Coffee. According to Coffee, it's probably 2, and sort of define my life, just like be balanced. Try to be balanced. Whether it's like pick up a sport, whether it is pick like I've been picking up cooking these days, and that's been
I see that.
a lot of balance in my life that I didn't have sort of in my first couple of years of my PhD. Or whether it's going to the gym, like balance. Like you're not a robot. You can't go 100% on one thing. That's what robots are for. That's what computers are for. Let them be unbalanced, but you be as balanced as possible. And then 3, it's something I think that another thing that sort of defines me, and I think a lot about is leave a legacy. And a lot of people don't understand what that concept fundamentally means. And I think how I think about it is that if you think about the word legacy, it means that you fundamentally have made a difference. And the reason why I think it's sort of really important as we navigate the world is that not only as time compounds, time is also a very precious resource. And you only have some finite amount of time to live on this earth. And even if you think on a more sort of smaller scale, every sort of stage in your life is also finite. Like I have a 3-year time at Oxford. I had a 4-year time at Harvard. I'm going to have a X amount of time at whatever company I joined. So time and experiences are very finite. And leaving a legacy just fundamentally means that the time that you were there, you left it in a better place than when you joined. And yeah, I think that sort of is what keeps me going, is what keeps me excited. And it's a really fundamental way to think about it. I think sort of like your time on this earth.
Nice. Appreciate you sharing that. So for the folks on the call, teamwork, being balanced, and leaving a legacy. And we'd love to hear when that time comes what yours are as an audience. And the last thing, what are 3 books that you recommend?
So yeah, so I'll give a variety. I'll give like
Okay, cool.
a mix. So I think from a technical book, I would recommend this book called Introduction to Probability from Huang and Blitzstein. It was my statistics in my introduction to statistics and probability book at my undergrad, and it's the best book ever written in my opinion on probability.
Cool.
And being able to understand probability is not only important from like a technical standpoint, but from just like to navigate life and make decisions. It's really fundamental. Two, it's a recent book that I read, Atomic Habits.
Okay.
It's a fascinating book, and it's very practical in how you sort of, and that shows that book also shows that like habits compound, time compounds, and investing a little every day in sort of developing the right habits is one of the biggest investments in sort of success and sort of your development. So Atomic Habits, I think, is a must-read book. And then the last one would be Rich Dad Poor Dad.
Okay.
And it's all about, I think we go all our lives learning about math, we learn about English, we learn about stats, we learn about history, but no one teaches us about money and finance and financial literacy. And I think this book is probably the best book in sort of getting an instruction on how to sort of manage your personal finance, how to invest your money, and how to I think financial literacy is just not taught at school, and it's really fundamental to sort of be successful in this world. So yeah, that's my three.
Fantastic. And once again, we appreciate the time, and thanks for sharing the knowledge, perspectives, and hopefully everyone on the call has learned a lot. And I've enjoyed the conversation and looking forward to the other ones.